He walks into the wedding alone. No date, no ring, no need to explain himself. There's no bitterness in his step, no heartbreak hiding in his eyes. If anything, he's the calmest person in the room. The groom keeps fiddling with his tie, his palms sweating under the weight of the moment. The bride clutches her bouquet so tight it looks like she's afraid to let go. The music plays, the guests smile. The whole room is wrapped up in a performance they've all rehearsed their whole lives. But not him. He moves like he's not part of the script at all, like he's watching something that no one else can see. People notice him. They can't help it. Heads turn as he passes. Some pretend not to look, but their eyes follow him anyway. Whispers trail in his wake. Aunties lean toward each other, murmuring. Fathers shift their gaze away as if making eye contact would open a door they don't want to walk through. Even the married men adjust their posture, standing a little taller, straightening their jackets, like they're bracing themselves. They smile at him, but it's a tight, uncertain smile, the kind you give when you're not sure if you're facing a friend or a threat, because he's everything they were told not to be. Unattached, unashamed, untamed. He doesn't flaunt it. He doesn't explain it away. When someone jokes, "Still single, huh?" he just nods and says, "I don't need marriage," and something shifts in the air. There's no laughter, no snarky comeback, just a quiet stillness, as if he's dropped something dangerous right in the middle of a sacred ceremony. Deep down, everyone hears it. Deep down, everyone feels it. That quiet, unspoken fear of a man who walks through life whole. A man who doesn't chase completion through someone else. A man who isn't lonely in solitude but powerful in it. He doesn't fit their lines. He doesn't play their part. He doesn't wear the mask of matrimony to prove his manhood. And that's what makes him dangerous. Not to women, not to the idea of love, but to a system that's been built on male dependence, emotional obedience, and quiet compliance. He is living proof that the story they were sold might be a lie. And here's the truth no one says out loud. If one man can thrive without marriage, what does that say about the rest who couldn't? From the moment you were old enough to understand words, a script was being fed into your head. One day you'll meet a nice girl. A real man settles down. You'll be happy once you're married. It sounded harmless at first, like guidance. But underneath, it wasn't love they were teaching you. It was obedience. No one asked you if you wanted marriage. You were told to assume it the way you assume gravity or death. A man without a wife? That was failure. That was immaturity. That was a red flag. By the time you could think for yourself, the programming had already taken root. Your value wasn't in who you were. It was in who you could win. Your worth wasn't measured by your depth, your purpose, your strength, but by your ability to secure a partner, put on the suit, buy the ring, and settle down. And here's the truth they don't tell you. It was never about your happiness. It was about your predictability. A married man is easier to manage. He has bills. He has guilt. He has mouths to feed. He's not a threat to the system, he's part of it. This is where Nitsic's truth cuts through the illusion. Nitsich called it slave morality, a belief system designed not to uplift you but to tame you. It teaches you to value approval over power, conformity over truth, obedience over freedom. Be good, be safe, be dependable. And you believed it because everyone around you did too. Your father, your teachers, your friends, all walking the same path, all wearing the same mask. Nitsich warned about this. He said most people don't really live. They live by values they never questioned. They inherit morality like a virus. They wear it like a leash and call it virtue. So when a man refuses the leash, when he says, "I choose to stay unmarried because I choose myself," he's not just making a personal choice. He's committing a philosophical rebellion. He becomes what Nitsich called the overman. Not a tyrant, not a destroyer, but a man who creates his own values instead of adopting society's. And that terrifies the system because it reminds everyone else that they had a choice all along. You were told marriage is tradition, that it's sacred, that it's part of growing up. But here's the truth no one likes to admit. Marriage is an economic design disguised as a moral duty. You think you're falling in love, but behind the scenes, the machine is running. the wedding industry, real estate, insurance, healthcare, banking, consumer goods. Almost every major financial system profits more when you're married, because a married man spends more, works longer, complies faster, and takes fewer risks. He buys the house, he upgrades the car, he signs the family plan, he takes the job he hates because he has to. And all of it is fueled by one thing: his need to be accepted. Neediness is monetized. Dependence becomes revenue. Insecurity becomes market strategy. A man who doesn't feel complete is easy to guide, easy to guilt, easy to sell to, easy to scare. But a man who needs no one breaks the cycle. He doesn't buy to impress. He doesn't upgrade to attract. He doesn't perform for validation. He chooses based on desire, not deficiency. And that makes him dangerous. Not to society itself, but to the engine that keeps it running. Nitsich warned us. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. The man who doesn't govern his own desires will be governed by someone else's. So when a man comes along who doesn't crave approval, who doesn't follow the script, who doesn't panic at the thought of solitude, he breaks the algorithm. He short-circuits the loop. He becomes unprofitable. And the system needs you to be profitable. So it teaches you you're only valuable when someone else wants you. You're only complete when someone chooses you. You're only a man when you're married. But that's not truth. That's marketing. Because the man who doesn't need to be chosen is finally free to choose everything. There's a different energy in a man who doesn't chase. He's not angry. He's not jaded. He's not trying to prove anything. He's just not looking. Not for validation. Not for someone to complete him. Not for approval from people who gave up on themselves long ago. He walks alone, not because he has no one, but because he doesn't need anyone to define his path. And in that silence is power. Most men are terrified of being alone, not because they hate solitude, but because solitude exposes truth. Without distractions, they face the parts of themselves they've been trained to avoid. The fears, the desires, the selfishness, the rage, the need to be worshipped. But the man who walks alone doesn't run from it. He turns inward. He descends into his own unconscious. He meets the figure Jung called the shadow, the dark, rejected side of the self. Most men project that darkness onto others. The complete man integrates it. He admits, yes, I have rage. Yes, I want to be free. Yes, I resist being owned. And in doing so, he becomes immune to the weapons society uses to tame him. Guilt, shame, loneliness, social pressure. You can't guilt a man who has faced his darkness and still stands in the light. You can't manipulate a man who has learned to sit beside his hunger without feeding it. That's what Jung called individuation. Becoming psychologically whole. Not good. Not bad. Whole. Most men are like tame dogs. Well-fed. Groomed. Predictable. They bark when commanded. They sit when praised. They trade freedom for comfort. But the man who walks alone is the wild wolf. Scarred. Silent. Free. He doesn't beg. He doesn't bite without cause. He roams where he chooses, not where he's leashed. And here's what scares society. You can't domesticate a wild wolf. And you can't control a man who knows how to walk alone. He's not screaming into a camera online. He's not trying to convince anyone to join him. And that's exactly what makes him more dangerous than any protest could ever be. He simply stops playing. He stops feeding the machine. He doesn't buy what he doesn't need. He doesn't chase what doesn't serve him. He doesn't perform for love, for praise, or for permission. And when enough men start doing that, the gears start to grind. The economy thrives on one thing above all else: emotional insecurity. It whispers to men, upgrade your car and you'll be more attractive. Buy the bigger house to prove you're a provider. Get married, it's what real men do. But when a man says no, when he says I am already complete, he becomes unpredictable. He becomes unprofitable. He becomes a threat. Because if men no longer need external validation to feel like men, who buys the diamond ring? Who signs the 30-year mortgage? Who locks himself into the family phone plan? The man who doesn't need marriage isn't just single, he's unplugged. He's the glitch in a system designed to convert insecurity into cash. He's the broken cog in a machine that only runs when everyone obeys the same script. He's the ghost in the algorithm. You can't track him. You can't tempt him. You can't scare him into doing what you want. And here's what the system fears most: other men seeing him. Because when one man thrives without the old rules, the illusion starts to crack. The myth begins to collapse. The cycle slows. And the system, starved of obedience, starts to shake. He's the walking question no one wants to face. What if everything they taught me about manhood was never mine to begin with? There's a reason most men stay trapped. They only ever become half of who they are. From a young age, they're told exactly what to be. Be polite. Be strong. Be controlled. Be self-sacrificing. They're handed a script, a smile, and a suit. And they never stop to wonder what happened to the rest of them. But Carl Jung did. He mapped it out. What he found was both terrifying and liberating. He called it the path of individuation, the journey of becoming a whole human being. That path isn't about perfection. It's about integration. Most men only operate with fragments of themselves. They live inside what Jung called the persona, the mask they wear in public. The image of the good man, the husband, the provider, the reliable son. But behind that mask is everything they were told to suppress. Their anger, their chaos, their selfishness, their hunger to escape, their craving for silence, space, solitude. This is the shadow, the dark side of the self. Most men spend their lives avoiding it, denying it, or projecting it onto others. But the man who doesn't need marriage has done something rare. He turned inward. He faced the parts of himself society told him to hate. He stopped asking whether they were good or bad and started asking if they were true. And then he went deeper into what Jung called the anima, the inner feminine. Not weakness, not softness, but the source of emotional depth, intuition, and inner balance. The anima is what most men try to find in women, believing she completes me. But this man completes himself. He doesn't outsource his wholeness. He builds it. And as he integrates everything, the persona, the shadow, the anima, he stops performing goodness and starts living in truth. He's not nice. He's not mean. He's real. He doesn't marry because he's supposed to. He marries or doesn't marry because he's whole either way. He doesn't seek completion through connection. He seeks connection from completeness. And that shift, from performing to being, makes him immune to shame, pressure, and manipulation. He is no longer a man trying to be good. He is a man who has become whole. You've been told marriage is sacred, that it's the backbone of family, that it's rooted in love, morality, and tradition. But what if that's just branding? When you trace the history of marriage, you don't find romance. You find ownership, economics, predictability. Marriage was never born out of love. It was forged as a tool to control inheritance, to lock in land deals, to secure bloodlines, and to control women's sexuality. It wasn't about connection. It was about containment. Later, religion stepped in, blessing the transaction, moralizing the union, and threatening damnation to anyone who questioned it. Then came the state with tax benefits, legal privileges, and insurance incentives, tying personal choices to political compliance. And finally came the market. Corporations saw something in the married man. Dependability, predictability. He spends more. He takes fewer risks. He works longer hours. He's emotionally obedient, financially tied down, and easy to track. The myth of marriage as a moral obligation was the story they used to get you to sign the contract. And here's the betrayal. They made you believe it was your idea all along. They told you it was about love, but it was about leverage. They told you it was destiny, but it was design. So when a man rejects that narrative, when he says, "I choose myself before tradition," he's not being immature. He's not lost. He's waking up. He's realizing the path laid out for him was never his path. It was a leash dressed up as legacy. And here's your permission. You're allowed to question it. You're allowed to want something different. You're allowed to not need what they needed. Because the man who questions the myth of marriage isn't rejecting connection. He's rejecting programmed dependence. Nitsich didn't just say, "God is dead." He warned about what would come after. When belief systems collapse, he said, so do the structures they uphold. Morality, meaning, identity, and yes, marriage. For centuries, marriage wasn't just a social expectation. It was a moral requirement. It was sanctified, blessed. You got married because it was the right thing to do. To defy it was to invite shame, sin, or failure. But now those foundations are cracking. The church no longer defines truth. The state no longer defines identity. And the market no longer hides its manipulation. The result? For the first time in history, marriage is optional. And that terrifies people. Because when marriage becomes a choice, it reveals who is truly whole and who is clinging to it out of fear. The man who doesn't need marriage isn't immoral. He's evolved. He doesn't reject love. He redefines it. He doesn't reject commitment. He reclaims it. He knows morality has to come from within, that purpose must be created, not inherited, that wholeness must be built, not borrowed. This is the post-death of God world Nitsich talked about. A place where meaning is no longer handed down. It has to be forged. And in this world, marriage is no longer a destiny. It's a test of alignment, truth, and sovereignty. And only a complete man can pass it, because he doesn't marry to be saved. He marries because he's already free. There are two kinds of men walking the earth. One is praised. The other is feared. One is groomed to fit the mold. The other is watched carefully. One is loved for being dependable. The other is quietly resented for being free. Carl Jung called them two archetypal forces that live inside every psyche. The Apollonian and the Dionysian. The Apollonian man is the golden boy of society. He's structured, rational, predictable. He wears the suit. He buys the house. He chooses the school district before the first child is born. He follows the rules not because he's weak, but because the rules work for him. He provides. He sacrifices. He performs. He marries early, builds the family, saves for retirement. He represents order, logic, and responsibility. Society loves this man because it understands him. He fits the script. He plays his role. He's easy to tax, easy to track, easy to tame. Then there's the Dionysian man. He doesn't live by schedules. He lives by storms. He creates. He destroys. He wanders. He roars. He values freedom more than security, intensity more than comfort, truth more than approval. He might never marry, or he might, but only on his own terms. He might build an empire, then burn it down just to see what rises from the ashes. He might vanish into the wilderness for 6 months and return with a book, a business, or a scar. He is chaos, but it's sacred chaos. Untamed, uncontrolled, undeniably alive. And society, for all its praise of stability, quietly fears him. Because this man doesn't ask for permission. He doesn't wait to be chosen. He doesn't explain why he left or why he's not coming back. He is exactly what traditional marriage was designed to neutralize. Because marriage, at least in its historic form, isn't just about love. It's about converting the wild man into a provider. It's about turning unpredictability into reliability. But the man who rejects that conversion, who keeps his edge, doesn't become reckless. He becomes rare. He's not allergic to commitment. He's allergic to containment. He's the man who kept his fire. And that makes him dangerous. Not because he's violent. Not because he's cruel. But because he's unpredictable. And the world doesn't know how to handle a man who answers only to the fire inside him. Most men don't become men. They become actors. They learn their lines, they memorize the cues, they play the part. They smile at the in-laws. They work the extra shift. They swallow the emotion. They hold the mask in place. They are the good guy, the strong one, the safe choice. And one day, many of them wake up and wonder, whose life am I even living? Jung called that mask the persona, the false self built to please the crowd. It's not evil in small doses. Sometimes it's necessary. But when the mask becomes your identity, you lose the ability to tell what's real and what's just applause. A lot of men get married because it's the next logical scene in the play. Not because they've found someone who is truly aligned with their soul, but because they're terrified of what it would mean not to. They're afraid of the questions, afraid of the loneliness, afraid of the silence. But the individuated man, the man who has faced himself, stops performing. He lets the mask fall. And in that rawness, he discovers something most men never will. Real power doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from having the strength to choose. He doesn't chase relationships to feel complete. He builds himself until he is complete. Then, and only then, does he choose connection. From abundance, not from emptiness. This man doesn't marry for approval. He doesn't commit from fear. He loves a partner or he walks alone, and both choices come from a place of self-command. Because power isn't loud. It isn't boastful. It's not about dominance or rebellion for its own sake. Power is knowing who you are when no one is watching, and still choosing truth even when it costs you something. That's the man society can't own. That's the man who no longer needs to be seen, because he finally sees himself. Most people misunderstand Nitsic's most famous idea. They think will to power means domination, control, status, ruthlessness. But that's not it. The true will to power isn't about conquering others. It's about becoming yourself. It's the drive to create values where none exist. To sculpt meaning in a world that offers none. To reject inherited roles and carve your own identity from stone. That's what the man who doesn't need marriage has done. He's not avoiding connection. He's not afraid of love. He's not cold or unreachable. He's simply no longer building his life around someone else. He's building it from within. He's chosen to create himself fully, brutally, truthfully. And from that foundation, everything he brings into his life becomes a choice, not a compromise. This man doesn't seek power over women. He doesn't seek power over society. He seeks power over the only thing that truly matters, himself. His fears, his impulses, his need for approval, his inherited programming. He doesn't reject marriage because he's against union. He rejects the version of marriage that asks him to betray his evolution. He doesn't need to rebel to be powerful. He just needs to create. And when he does, he becomes something rare, a value generator in a world of copy and paste lives, a lighthouse in a sea of confusion, a creator in a culture of consumers. And that's the reimagined will to power. Not to rule others, but to become so complete that your existence inspires others to rise. Forget what they taught you for a moment. Forget what a man is supposed to do. Forget what love is supposed to look like. Forget the praise you were trained to chase. Strip it all away and ask yourself, whose story are you living? Is it yours? Or is it a script you inherited without consent? Most men don't choose their lives. They drift into them. They perform. They adapt. And they call it purpose. They call it maturity. They call it love. But deep down, something feels off. Because when your choices are rooted in fear, fear of being alone, fear of being judged, fear of being different, you're not building a life. You're building a cage. One you might not even see. And that's the truth most men never confront. They didn't marry from wholeness. They married from need. They didn't choose. They obeyed. The man who doesn't need marriage forces a reckoning. He's the mirror no one wants to look into, because his very existence asks the question that keeps people up at night. What if I built my entire life on someone else's idea of what makes a man? He shows you it's possible to be whole before the vow, to be free before the family, to be powerful without the performance. And that power doesn't destroy relationships. It transforms them. It builds partnerships based on authenticity, not obligation. On connection, not compliance. On mutual growth, not mutual dependency. And this is what Nitsich meant when he said, become who you are, not who your parents hoped for, not who society designed, not who your insecurities pretend to be, but the man underneath the performance. The man who can love without needing. The man who can commit without collapsing. The man who can walk away, not out of fear, but out of truth. So the question isn't, should you get married or not? The real question is, are you choosing from fear or from strength? From programming or from soul? Because the man who doesn't need marriage has already made his choice. He knows he can live fully either way. That's the difference. His identity isn't hanging on someone else's decision. His worth isn't tied to his relationship status. And when a man gets to that point, everything changes. You can see it in the way he moves. There's no hurry in his step, no nervous energy scanning the room, no restless glances at his phone. He's not seeking distraction, because he doesn't need to escape himself. When he speaks, there's no edge of trying to impress. When he listens, it's not because he's playing a part. He's simply present. That presence is unsettling to some, magnetic to others, and completely outside the market's control. Most men are taught to be providers before they ever learn how to be whole, to prove their worth before they ever discover who they are. They're taught to chase titles, chase partners, chase milestones. But chasing is just another form of running away from the silence that would force them to face themselves. And that's why solitude feels like a threat. It's not the absence of others that scares them. It's the presence of truth. The man who doesn't need marriage has walked straight into that silence. He's confronted the shadows that most men bury under work, under relationships, under endless noise. He's looked at his own anger, his own selfishness, his own longing for freedom. He hasn't tried to kill those parts. He's claimed them. He's said, "This is me too." That's why the old weapons don't work on him. You can't shame him into conformity when he's already made peace with his darkness. You can't guilt him into compliance when his compass points inward, not outward. Jung called this the work of individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole. It's not about being perfect. It's not about being pure. It's about being integrated. And an integrated man is dangerous to a system built on keeping people fractured, dependent, and in need of constant validation. Because if more men integrated themselves, they'd stop buying to fill a hole. They'd stop living for approval. They'd stop trading their freedom for comfort just because that's what they were told a good man does. That's why so much of modern marketing, media, and even tradition itself relies on the promise that someone else will complete you. It's a profitable story. It sells rings, houses, vacations, furniture, insurance, bigger cars, and lifetime debt. The story says, once you have her, once you build this life, once you play your part, you'll be enough. But it's a lie that keeps men running on the same track forever. The man who doesn't need marriage steps off the track. He's not running the race anymore, so he's not chasing the rewards that come with it. And that's the crack in the wall the system fears. Because if too many men step off, the whole structure starts to crumble. The economy runs on insecurity like a car runs on gas. Take away the fuel and it stalls. That's why his existence is treated as a threat, even if he never tries to convince anyone else to live like he does. And yet, this man isn't against marriage itself. He's against the version of marriage that turns a wild spirit into a docile provider. He's against the idea that you must trade your freedom to prove your value. He's against the assumption that needing someone is the same as loving them. If he marries, it's because the person beside him amplifies his life, not because she completes it. If he commits, it's because it's aligned, not because it's expected. That kind of choice is rare. It's not just a different kind of love. It's a different kind of man. One who doesn't approach relationships from emptiness, but from overflow. Who doesn't see partnership as a rescue mission, but as a collaboration between two whole people. Who doesn't fear walking alone, because he knows he's never lost when he's with himself. When Nitsich talked about the overman, he wasn't describing someone above others in status or wealth. He was describing someone above the old scripts. Someone who creates his own values when the inherited ones no longer fit. Someone who doesn't wait for permission to live. That's why the overman is so rare, and why his presence feels like both a challenge and an invitation. Because when you see a man who is free in that way, you start to wonder why you aren't. You start to question the rules you've been living by. You start to feel the edges of the cage you didn't know you were in. And that's where change begins, not in rebellion for its own sake, but in the quiet realization that the life you thought you had to live might not be yours at all. The man who doesn't need marriage is not here to tell you what to do. He's here to show you what's possible when you choose yourself first. And the truth is, most men won't. Not because they can't, but because it's easier to stay in the comfort of the known. Even if that comfort is a cage. even if the walls are built out of their own unexamined fears. But every once in a while a man steps out, and when he does, he doesn't just change his life. He changes the map for everyone watching. He knows that stepping out isn't about rejecting people. It's about rejecting the lie that you are incomplete without them. It's about recognizing that love is a choice, not a cure. And once you've seen that, you can never unsee it. You can never go back to the old way of living, where your worth depends on someone else's approval, where your future is dictated by a script you never agreed to. This is why the man who doesn't need marriage can be so unsettling to those around him. He holds up a mirror, and in that reflection, people see the choices they didn't make. They see the risks they didn't take. They see the life they built on someone else's terms. And instead of facing that, it's easier to call him selfish, immature, or afraid of commitment. It's easier to dismiss him than to admit that maybe, just maybe, he's living with a kind of freedom they secretly want. But freedom is expensive. Not in money, but in what you have to give up to have it. You have to give up the comfort of the crowd. You have to give up the applause that comes from doing what's expected. You have to give up the illusion that someone else will save you from yourself. Most men aren't ready to pay that price. But the ones who are, the ones who step into that kind of sovereignty, find that it's worth more than anything they could have traded it for. This is why his presence shakes the system. Because he isn't just a man without a wedding band. He's a man without a leash. And a man without a leash isn't predictable. He can't be guilted into working a job he hates just to keep up with the mortgage. He can't be lured into debt with the promise of status. He can't be scared into submission by the threat of being alone. The system doesn't know what to do with a man like that. For centuries, it's relied on keeping men in a state of controlled need, needing approval, needing security, needing the structure that comes from fitting in. That need drives the economy, fuels the culture, and keeps the hierarchy intact. Remove the need, and the whole machine starts to lose its grip. And this is where the truth becomes dangerous. Because once you understand that you are already whole, you can no longer be controlled in the same way. You start making choices based on desire, not deficiency. You stop chasing what doesn't serve you. You stop performing for an audience that's not even watching. And when enough men start living like that, it forces the rest of the world to change. That's why the man who doesn't need marriage isn't anti-love. He's not anti-commitment. He's not even against tradition. He's simply unwilling to trade his wholeness for it. If he marries, it's from strength, not from lack. If he loves, it's from freedom, not from fear. And that's the shift that changes everything. Because when two whole people choose each other, the relationship becomes something completely different. It's not about filling gaps. It's about amplifying each other's lives. It's not about clinging out of fear. It's about walking side by side because you both want to. It's not about staying because you're trapped. It's about staying because you're free. And that's the kind of love most people never experience. Not because it's impossible, but because it requires you to face yourself first. To do the work. To sit in the silence. To meet your shadow. To build a life that is already worth living before anyone else steps into it. Most people aren't willing to go that far. But the ones who do, they know the truth. You can't lose yourself in love if you never gave yourself away in the first place. So here we are, back where we started. He walks into the wedding alone. No date, no ring, no apologies. The groom still fidgets. The bride still grips her bouquet. The guests still play their part. And he still moves through it all untouched by the performance. People watch him, some with curiosity, some with envy, some with fear. They don't all understand why he feels different, but they feel it just the same. What they're seeing is a man who has chosen himself before he chose anyone else. A man who could marry tomorrow or never marry at all and still be complete. A man who is free not because he's alone, but because his freedom isn't conditional on someone else's approval. And that's the quiet revolution. Not shouting, not protesting, just living in a way that proves the old rules aren't the only way. That wholeness is possible without the ring. That love is richer when it's chosen freely. That manhood has nothing to do with how closely you follow the script, and everything to do with how honestly you live your truth. In the end, it's not about marriage at all. It's about whether you're building your life from strength or from fear, whether you're chasing someone else's definition of success or writing your own, whether you're willing to stand alone if it means standing in truth. The man who doesn't need marriage has already made his choice. The question is, what's yours?